High above the clouds where oxygen fades and temperatures plummet, there is a place often described as both magnificent and merciless. Mount Everest, the world's tallest mountain, is the dream of climbers everywhere. Yet behind the glory and breathtaking views, Everest carries a reputation that chills to the bone. Its slopes are littered with frozen reminders of ambition, determination, and sometimes tragic miscalculation. Over 300 climbers have lost their lives attempting the climb, and around 200 of their bodies remain on the mountain to this day, preserved by the unrelenting cold. For many, these bodies are not just markers of mortality, but grim landmarks on the journey upward. Among all of Everest's tragedies, a few stand out as especially haunting. These are the stories that continue to be retold, not only because of the harsh conditions that claimed these lives, but because of the unforgettable human moments tied to them. Here are 6 of the most haunting and heartbreaking deaths in the history of Everest. The mystery of green boots. The name that first comes to mind when thinking about Everest's most infamous deaths is green boots. To this day, climbers ascending through the northern route of Everest often pass by the unmistakable sight of a body half buried in the snow, legs stretched out, marked by a pair of green climbing boots. For years, this body has been a chilling reminder that the mountain takes as much as it gives. The true identity of green boots remains uncertain. Many believe it is Chewang Paljor, a member of an Indian team in 1996, who perished in the attempt. Others suggest it could be Dorje Morup, another climber who disappeared under similar circumstances. Whoever he was, his body has become a grim landmark at nearly 8,500 meters. Climbers know that reaching green boots means they are in the final stretch of the death zone, about 350 meters away from the summit. There is a certain cruelty in how green boots became less of a man and more of a marker. For over 2 decades, thousands have walked past him, snapping photos, muttering prayers, or perhaps choosing to look away entirely. No one knows the full story of his final hours, whether he sat down exhausted or collapsed in despair, but his presence has given a face, or perhaps more fittingly, a silhouette, to the risks of Everest. While some prefer to remember the beauty of the climb, others cannot shake the image of those green boots sticking out of the snow. David Sharp, a death witnessed by dozens. But if green boots is Everest's most notorious body, then David Sharp's death is perhaps its most controversial. David was not a novice climber. His love for mountains began when he was young, climbing Roseberry Topping in North Yorkshire. Over time, he scaled Kilimanjaro, Elbrus, and Cho Oyu, slowly building the resume of an alpinist destined for greatness. In 2003, he joined an Everest expedition, and although he failed to reach the summit, he showed remarkable stamina. Severe frostbite during that attempt cost him several fingers, yet it did not dull his determination. David's story took a darker turn in 2006. Unlike many others, he chose to climb Everest without supplemental oxygen. For climbers, summiting without oxygen is seen as a badge of honor, a true test of endurance against the most extreme conditions on Earth. But the cost of that decision is often deadly. On May 13, 2006, David made his push toward the summit. Climbers later reported seeing him at various points, moving slowly, clearly exhausted. Eventually, he stopped in a small limestone cave near Green Boots. There, he sat down, arms wrapped around his knees, trying to fight the cold and the creeping darkness of hypoxia. One by one, groups of climbers passed by him. Some offered medicine, some gave a few breaths of oxygen, but no one stayed long enough to carry him down. Over 40 climbers passed him that day. None rescued him. The debate over David's death sparked outrage around the world. Was Everest really a place where climbers valued their own summit more than another person's life? Sir Edmund Hillary, one of the first men to conquer Everest, called it a disgrace, saying that such attitudes existed only on Everest and not elsewhere in the Himalayas. Yet David's own mother, Linda Sharp, told reporters she did not blame the other climbers. To her, the duty of a climber was to save themselves first. Still, David Sharp's lonely death stands as one of the mountain's most haunting examples of human indifference, or perhaps helplessness. Surrounded by people, yet utterly alone, he froze on the slopes, his face blackened by frostbite, his dream of reaching the summit ending in silence beside green boots. Francis Arsenyev, the Sleeping Beauty of Everest. A very different tragedy struck in 1998, and it became known as the story of Sleeping Beauty. Her real name was Francis Arsenyev, and she climbed Everest with her husband Sergei, both attempting to reach the top without supplemental oxygen. Francis was a determined woman, known for her fearless adventures. She dreamed of becoming the first American woman to summit Everest without oxygen. Together with Sergei, she began the climb, but the journey quickly turned perilous. Their flashlights failed, forcing them to spend a night in complete darkness at extreme altitude. Progress slowed to a crawl, and exhaustion overtook them. After days above 8,000 meters, their bodies weakened dangerously. In the death zone, every minute matters, and Francis and Sergei had spent far too many. When other climbers encountered Francis, she was barely conscious, her clothing scattered. It is a grim reality of severe frostbite and hypothermia that the body sometimes feels unbearably hot, leading victims to strip layers off even as they freeze. Francis begged for help, whispering, "I am an American, please don't leave me." Climbers tried to move her, but her body had stiffened, muscles refusing to bend. For hours they tried to save her, but carrying someone in deep snow at that altitude is nearly impossible. Eventually, they had to make the heartbreaking decision to leave her. Sergei, determined to rescue his wife, went back up with oxygen and medicine, but he never returned. His body was discovered a year later, evidence that he had fallen while trying to find her. Francis, meanwhile, remained where she had fallen, her body lying in the snow for 9 years. Climbers called her Sleeping Beauty, a tragic landmark, until finally, in 2007, her remains were respectfully moved and draped with the American flag, accompanied by a note from her son. The Sleeping Beauty of Everest is perhaps one of the mountain's most heartbreaking tales. It is a story of love, of ambition, and of how even devotion and sacrifice can crumble before the merciless conditions of the death zone. Scott Fisher, the guide who pushed too far. Fast forward to 1996, and Everest saw one of its deadliest disasters in history. That year, both Scott Fisher, leader of Mountain Madness, and Rob Hall, leader of Adventure Consultants, perished in a storm that would claim 8 lives in total. Their deaths became the subject of books, films, and endless debates about commercial climbing on Everest. Scott Fisher was known as a strong, charismatic guide. He had climbed some of the highest peaks without supplemental oxygen and had built a reputation as a risk-taker who cared deeply about his clients. But guiding Everest in 1996 stretched him thin. He helped sick clients descend, climbed back up to assist others, and by the time he himself approached the summit, his body was already dangerously depleted. Reaching the top around 4 p.m., well past the recommended turnaround time, Fisher was exhausted, dizzy, and likely suffering from altitude sickness. Then the storm hit. Winds howled at 240 kilometers per hour, and snow erased visibility. Fisher urged his team to go down without him, unwilling to slow them further. By the time rescuers reached him later, he was gone, his body left near the route. Even in death, his reputation endured as a guide who put his clients before himself. Rob Hall, A Final Call Home. But Fisher was not the only guide to fall that day. Rob Hall, another legendary climber, faced his own tragedy. Rob was known for his achievements in the Seven Summits Challenge and for his company's reputation as one of the best guiding outfits on Everest. On that same day in 1996, his group also summited late. One of his clients, Doug Hansen, was struggling badly. Hall refused to abandon him, staying by his side even as conditions worsened. As the storm raged, Hansen died. Hall, stranded, tried to survive with a dwindling supply of oxygen. At one point, he even managed to speak to his wife via satellite phone. His final words to her were heartbreaking. "Sleep well, my love. Please don't worry too much." Soon after, he succumbed to the mountain. The deaths of Fisher and Hall exposed the risks of commercial expeditions, where climbers with varying levels of experience depend on guides, and deadlines are often ignored in the race for the summit. It was a sobering reminder that even the most skilled professionals are no match for Everest's fury. George Mallory and Andrew Irvine, Everest's Great Mystery. Finally, no list of Everest's haunting deaths is complete without George Mallory and Andrew Irvine. Long before the commercial expeditions, long before Everest was conquered by Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, in 1953, Mallory and Irvine attempted to be the first to stand on the summit in 1924. Their story became legend. Mallory was determined, fearing that if he delayed much longer, age would rob him of his chance. Together with 22-year-old Andrew Irvine, he made his fateful push toward the summit. On June 8, 1924, they were spotted just a few hundred meters from the top. Then they vanished into the mist. For 75 years, their fate remained one of mountaineering's greatest mysteries. In 1999, Mallory's body was finally discovered, astonishingly well preserved. His injuries suggested he had fallen. His climbing partner Irvine, however, was never found. The mystery remains whether they actually reached the summit before dying. If they did, it would mean Mallory and Irvine, not Hillary and Norgay, were the first to conquer Everest. But with no conclusive proof, the answer is likely lost forever. The story of Mallory and Irvine highlights the eternal allure and danger of Everest. Ambition drove them into the death zone, but history could not record their final achievement. Their bodies and their mystery are Everest's secret to keep. Everest continues to claim lives year after year. In 2023 alone, 17 climbers perished within the first 6 months, a chilling reminder that the mountain has not grown any kinder. It remains a place where triumph and tragedy sit side by side, where frozen bodies whisper silent warnings to those still climbing. The 6 stories shared today are among the most haunting, yet they are only part of the mountain's grim history. Each climber who died on Everest had a dream, a family, a reason to push forward. Their stories remind us not only of the risks of ambition, but also of the fragility of human life when tested against nature's extremes. Everest is a dream for many, but it is also a graveyard in the sky. And that wraps up this deep dive into the top 6 worst deaths on Everest in human history. If this journey through tragedy and resilience was fascinating, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more gripping stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. Would you ever risk it all for the top of the world?